evaluate what's going on in that location. Go ahead. So can you back that up, Carl? So what you saw just there previously was Mr. Bennett crossing through the exit and attempting to gain access to the outside, running past other patrons and eventually exiting the door there. So go ahead and back it up, Carlos. That's good right there. Stop it. So right here, what you just saw was there was a 3-officer team. There was 2 officers, one in a Metro uniform similar to what I am wearing, an officer in green uniforms, more of a tactical uniform, and then a sergeant who body camera is displaying this video. He is to the rear of this officer. Of note, the officer that has already exited the doorway there, gave chase to Mr. Bennett, has already gone over the wall that we described earlier in the previous press conference and attempting to take Mr. Bennett into custody. He separated from his 2 officers here in order to chase down Mr. Bennett, and these 2 officers are approaching to assist. Now, it's important to note, because we talked about race earlier, the officer that took Mr. Bennett into custody is Hispanic. This officer is also Hispanic, and the officer wearing the body-worn camera is a sergeant, and he is a black male. So go ahead, Carlos. And stop when he has him on the ground, okay? Stop there. So as you can see, a review of this area where he's taken into custody is approximately 7 feet from the original sidewalk. Mr. Bennett bound over the wrought iron fencing and down into the roadway. Early Saturday morning, late Friday night, or actually early Sunday morning, late Saturday night, this is Flamingo Boulevard. As everybody in the room knows, that's one of our busiest intersections during the weekend. So besides taking him into custody in the roadway, we have concern for traffic at this point. And then you will see the firearm in possession of our officer there, and then I will talk further about that later in the presentation. So the officer that was in the greens will be standing at the railway providing cover to this officer, and then the sergeant is also what you're seeing from the body camera. Go ahead, Carlos. So what happened was you saw the officer taking him in custody when he was prone on the roadway, placing him in handcuffs. Subsequently, they put him on his knees, adjacent to the patrol car, and his custody was released from the original officer to another officer to take him away from the immediate area, in the safety of other patrol cars out in the roadway. Go ahead. So go ahead and stop it, guys. Important piece that just went by in the narrative there. Mr. Bennett expressed to the officer his concern, obviously, for being taken into custody. He was doing nothing more than what he was asked to do. He also provided narrative that they were told not to run. That's a very important piece in reference to his allegations. Go ahead. Another allegation alleged by Mr. Bennett was the officer had placed a gun to his head and stated if he would move that we would blow your fucking head off. I believe that's the correct narrative. Through our investigation, and like I said, this is totally based on facts known at the time. As of today, we have not been able to confirm that statement by the officer. What we have been able to confirm through review of the video is the officer did in fact say, put your fucking hands up and put your fucking palms together. So I think it's important for people to realize that. It's a matter of doing a dynamic police in custody event, and then subsequently you'll see the rest of it. Go ahead, Carlos.
I don't know what happened with them. Hey, I'm gonna fuck my life, man, for no reason. Okay. Be here, sir. Not you, wasn't you, with the other guy. I'm gonna check your trust real quick, make sure they're not too tight, okay? Please, I'm coming back and just talk to you guys because I didn't even do anything. Okay? I'm being detained for what? Tell me what am I being detained for? I need to do anything to get detained. I'm just a person ready for somebody shooting. Then they said, why you jumping? I'm like, somebody shooting, man. I got 3 daughters. I want to know what's my kid. Okay. And that's understandable. And that's all. I don't know why they took me into custody, okay? I can't ask you any questions right now. Okay. Hey, literally just said that. Okay. But man, when I went down and he shot me, I didn't do anything. Okay. Nobody gets to me and do steps or anything. Nobody gets me a reason, nothing. Better you than this. I just want to go home, man. And nobody can tell me what I did. Hey, that's not a tool, man. Hey, I don't know what you did, okay? I didn't do anything. But the people in charge just handed you off to me, okay? Okay. Anyway, yeah, because when we're going, for everybody to get down, you better get up and get out these doors. I have no trouble the door again. So,
Carlos, can you repeat that statement there? Go ahead.
Yeah, out these doors. I have no trouble the door again. So, that's it. Oh, that makes sense.
So go ahead and stop it right there. So the officer you saw in the green to the rear of the patrol car was one of the original officers I described in the 3-person element. After they completed the investigation within the Cromwell, he proceeded out to the roadway there to talk to the custody officers and present them with the information they needed to know whether to release Mr. Bennett or not. He told them the investigation was complete. They determined there was not a shooter within the Cromwell and go ahead and release the individual in the back of the car. At this point, none of the officers know who Mr. Bennett is, other than they reacted to his suspicious actions and they placed him into custody.
Alright, so you already said? I'm not mad at y'all. You already said we hear somebody shooting in there. Everyone's down. You're running. I'm trying to get out, Mark. Yeah, stop. I understand. But you still understand how that looks, though. Yeah. Okay, you're not in under arrest. We're going to get you out of here, okay? But we have to make sure, right now, all we know is people are shooting in there is what we're hearing. And then you're running away. So we're making sure that it's not you. Now, come out. And if it's not you, we don't have time to be out here talking to you. Do you have an ID on you? No, man. My name is Michael Bennett. Okay. Michael Bennett. Okay, we have Jersey covered on the exterior side of LA. So we Michael perfectly. We've got okay, well, we have that, but what's your name, brother? Put the something to get down, put the guns in the back of my head, they're gonna blow my head off. What are y'all scared as fuck, man? 79 70 on this channel. Okay. 79 70. Oh, 655. Oh, 779 Stuff like that happens. We don't have time to get into like the talk so many explain here. We have to make sure people are safe. We have to have it happen now. But when people are trying to be safe, you understand what I'm saying is that when everyone's down here running, we don't know what's going on. We don't have time to figure everything out. That's why we threw you back here, make sure you're safe. Threw you back here while we're trying to figure everything out. So that's why this happened. I believe you 100% that you didn't do anything. But we don't have time to have one-on-ones right now when we have somebody in there shooting at us. We have to make sure this is taken care of. So you at no point were you under arrest. He probably thought maybe you were the shooter, like I said, you were running. So he's probably like, well, I don't have time. Sometimes they say stuff like that to get compliance real quick so we can get taken care of and figure it out when everybody's safe. What's your name, bro? Pretty strong. Resources upstairs or you can that stuff. I mean, I imagine you, but if I need a picture of them, football, you direct them? Okay. I believe you go. Okay. And open the screen up and down there. It's important, but we have to do it. Okay. And we don't have people that are shooting at us, so when you're yelling at us, we just need to get to there and stand up. Sorry that happened, but if I want to have the other piece, you gotta go that way. This is all blocked up.
That's Mr. Bennett in the adjacent crosswalk area leaving the Cromwell. So I had this presented as part of the presentation in case anybody has any questions. Reference reasonable suspicion versus probable cause and the authority of our officers to have the ability to detain Mr. Bennett. I'll give you a second to read that and then we will continue. So I think it's important for everybody to understand how comprehensive this investigation was. As a normal matter of practice, if we receive a complaint as a police agency or my police agency, we take each and every one of those complaints seriously. As we receive the complaint, no matter what the venue is or the method, we receive the complaint. If we have evidence in support of the complaint or to refute the complaint, we will close out the investigation at that point. So in normal practice, we have basically an anonymous complaint by Mr. Bennett, and I mean anonymous because it was presented via social media. It wasn't directly towards the police department. There were some serious allegations in his statements, and I thought it appropriate to conduct a thorough investigation because it was far-reaching. It has national implications, and more importantly, it disparaged my police department and the officers involved in this incident. So I thought it was very important for us to go ahead and conduct a thorough investigation. We had not received a formal directed complaint from Mr. Bennett or his attorney. In the last 3 days we did. Via electronic media, a formal complaint was brought forward. And I will discuss that further here shortly. So as part of this investigation, we reviewed over 861 separate videos. Of those 861, we determined 193 of them were pertinent to the investigation. And today, you see a culmination of what we thought was instrumental in completing the investigation. So, in detention, the complaint of detention, excessive detention, the total incident took approximately 10 minutes. I'm sorry. Are you not hearing it?
Yeah.
Approximately 10 minutes, and his time at the car was approximately 7 minutes. So you can see the detention wasn't excessive. He complained about his handcuffs. The officer loosened them. As soon as the officer started to realize there was not a shooter, Mr. Bennett was released. During the release, he was given the reason for his detention, and he was apologized to for the detention. I want to say that I understand that being detained for a suspected felony is not a pleasant experience. But having said that, I also want to say the officers responding that night were heroic. They ran in versus away. They did what they were trained to do, not to wait, but to enter and control, secure, and make the situation safe. Additionally, 2 other patrons were detained in similar fashion as Mr. Bennett. One of those individuals was a Hispanic male, and the other one was a black male. Like law enforcement around the country and globally, we are ever mindful of the threats, especially during busy weekends with large crowds. Officers reacted exactly what they were trained to do during the critical incident. I would expect nothing less, and the public we serve expect the same. As soon as the officers realized that no probable cause was present for Mr. Bennett's continued detention, he was released. The Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department is proud of the work this agency has done in the area of use of force reform. We took it upon ourselves 7 years ago to change our policies and training to emphasize de-escalation and the preservation of life. We are considered a model agency. As the past has shown, this department is committed to transparency and accountability to the public we serve. We have a history of quickly releasing body-worn cameras, the footage associated with that, and the findings of use of force or critical incident investigations. So like I said, our current status on this investigation, we will take it through completion, but barring any additional evidence, it's basically finished. So as far as policy violations associated with the investigation, that will still yet to be determined, and that is not a part of public information. So I'm happy to answer questions at this time. Limiting it to this incident, I'm not interested in responding to the situation associated with the NFL in the current situation.
So directly stated to Mr. Bennett's allegation, he was targeted for racially motivated excessive force. Your response is?
I believe the last 20 minutes answered that question, Mr. Ritter. My response is there is no evidence that would show that to be true.
You said there was no evidence. The officer said that he was going to blow his head off. Was there any evidence found, or did the officer talk to you in regards to maybe pointing a gun to his head?
Yes, he was, but that's part of an internal investigation. And like I said, Ricardo, we have not found any evidence that shows that he made that statement.
That officer's body camera was off, though, right?
Correct.
Can you talk about that? So can Metro say that he didn't say that, or based on?
No, from the evidence we know at this point, we determined he had not said that. If there's additional evidence that comes forward at a later date, we will evaluate that. But here's what's important. It's a critical incident, dynamic incident. If the officer said it, he said it. If he didn't, he didn't. He was taking an individual who we believe to be an active shooter into custody. And the language associated with that may not be acceptable, but it's not a policy violation.
Do we know why the camera wasn't on?
He failed to activate it. He had been using it throughout the night on other incidents. In this situation, he became aware of Mr. Bennett's actions and gave chase. He just failed to activate it.
Could there be consequences for that?
There could be.
Will there be?
There could be.
Sheriff, can you go back over you made a point of a note. People were told not to run.
Correct.
Can you amplify that a little bit for us?
Well, there was different commands given during when the officers were in the stack and they were clearing the casino floor. They were telling people to stay in place, to get on the ground, and do not run. Mr. Bennett did not heed those directions. And as you can see, several other people in the casino didn't heed those directions. They decided to seek safety, and that's understandable. But Mr. Bennett's actions caught the officer's attention, along with the private security's attention, who had pointed out Mr. Bennett, and our officers keyed on his actions.
Sheriff, can you talk about what is behind Metro telling people in a shooter situation? Your instinct is to run. You hear gunshots, you run. And they're telling people to stay in place and get down. Can you describe why they would do that versus, telling everybody to get out?
Well, it's human nature. The reason why we would tell them not to run and get down is because we're still trying to determine where the suspect is. The suspect may be secreted amongst those individuals, and we want to make sure we identify them. The suspect doesn't attempt to escape or flee associated with the other people fleeing the incident. I think it's important for us to identify the shooter and take that individual into custody immediately.
So with, as you mentioned, other people we're seeing running in the video, what about Michael Bennett keyed on security and officers and on him?
I thought I had explained that, but I will clarify it again. You saw his actions going across the floor there. He was in a crouched position, different than everybody else, going in a different direction than other patrons. And then he proceeded along the bank of slots there with purpose. And here's the important piece, and I'm actually glad you asked that again, because the one thing I failed to narrate, and maybe I did, but I forget at this point, is as he exited that doorway, he leaped over the railing that was not observed by any other officer of any individuals doing that. So that was distinctive. So it was showing that he had purpose in his attempt to flee.
Can you clarify when the formal complaint was filed, the last 3 days, and then this week?
Do you have that date? I believe it was in the last 3 days.
And has the agency spoken to Mr. Bennett or his legal team regarding these images? Have they been delivered to them?
No, we're going through that process now. We have spoken to his legal team. We have offered them to come and look at the video at their pleasure, and they have not responded in that aspect.
Will you identify the officers who had direct contact with Mr. Bennett?
No, not at this point. It's a continued investigation.
Sure. I just want to make sure I'm clear on what I heard and saw. When he was talking with the officers, I didn't think I heard him say or complain or voice concern that an officer pointed at the gun. I think, but can you again make sure I'm clear on what his complaint was at the time?
I don't have his complaint in front of me, but in my review of the, can you get to that part in the video? I think you just went by it. Did that answer your question?
Hey, I don't know what.
And in the narrative, I believe in his letter to the world, he provided narrative. So to that effect.
In your review, you never found evidence of a statement about blowing his head off?
No, not so far. We have not found anything. Like I did state, we did find evidence of the officer directing him to put his hands out and up, and also to put his palms together.
Was a gun to his head? So we did not find a gun to his head?
No, we didn't find evidence of a gun to his head. You can see in the one video and the TMZ video that he has gun out to be utilized and taking the individual into custody. But as far as it pointing directly at his head, we couldn't see that.
Obviously, this was a very national story that was put out on social media and
Correct.
and all that before coming to as a formal complaint to you guys. What?
Well, it wasn't a formal complaint to us. I want to
it
provide
was
that
whatever
clarification.
became a formal
Right.
complaint to you guys, right?
Correct.
What has done to the department, to your staff, to officers, if anything, has it had any?
Well, they're interested to hear what I have to say today, just like anybody else. What happens in an investigation, the department is basically sequestered. They're not privy to the information as we go through the investigation, so it's troublesome for the officers. But I have made a public statement to my department that I support them in their actions. And going through the evidence, it's evident they acted appropriately.
For context, Sheriff, how many officers